everyone, and welcome back to the Degree of Footy. My name's Harvey Kennedy, and I am your host for today. We've also joined back by Henry, who didn't join us last week, but he is back with us today. We're joined by Murray, but never mind these two. We're actually joined by one of the industry's greats, and when I mean greats, I mean the greats, who's had a very successful career with Sky for, who last year he celebrated 25 years. Well, a year and a half ago, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's coming up to 27 seasons now.
Crazy.
Oh, my goodness.
But we are joined by Clare Tomlinson. Clare, how are you?
I'm great. I've had a lovely day here in the sunshine. Nice pizza for lunch. Thank you very much, Derby University. And I've been really impressed by the dedication and the enthusiasm that everyone on this course has shown for Employability Day. It's been a really, really fun day.
I bet it's been a long day, though.
Well, you know what? I don't know. Well, you want to do a shift in media? It's not a long day, believe me. What time is it now? 5 to 3, and we started at, I got here at 9. No, that's not a long shift. Believe me.
We haven't experienced it yet, lads. We haven't experienced it yet.
Hopefully one day. Hopefully one day. So, Claire, I'm going to take you back now to 2007, because I know quite a while ago, but this was quite a monumental moment for you, because you actually you were the first woman to present the Professional Footballers Association Awards.
That's right, yes.
How amazing was that?
Well, you know, it was hilarious because, of course, just my luck. You've got a young player of the year. Obviously, it predates when we had the women's awards, which obviously now run alongside. But you have a young player of the year and a main player of the year, and just my luck, Cristiano Ronaldo won them both. So I've got to interview him twice. Now, Cristiano, it was news to him. He didn't think he was going to get interviewed at all. He just thought he had to stand up there and look pretty with his trophy. When I told him I was interviewing him, he point blank refused and said he wasn't going to do it. So then I got the heavy artillery in the shape of his manager, and Sir Alex told him in no uncertain terms that he was doing both interviews. But I did say to Sir Alex, why don't you do the first interview for the Young Player of the Year with us? So be on stage and you can talk about him as a developing professional. Because when Cristiano first came to the country, he was quite skinny. And he was playing out on the wing, and you know, but he really bulked up that season.
Yeah.
And they put a lot of work into improving his strength on the pitch and on the ball, and that's really what transformed him. Because he was very, very young, but he was an amazing player. So we did the first interview, Young Player of the Year. That was all fine, and then he couldn't believe he got to do. He's going to do another one, and I said yes, but I'll ask different questions. And he was even more confused by this. He's like, but I've just practiced the questions. So I told him the sort of things I was going to ask him for the next set of questions, and you know, it's not a long interview.
Yeah.
And so one of the questions I thought I'd ask him was who was his idol. Who did he watch as a player growing up? Who did he like to watch play football? So he knew I was going to ask him this question. So we'd done a couple of questions, and then I said to him, "Who is your footballing idol?" And he pretended not to understand the question.
Yeah.
So he said, "What?" So I explained it to him. You know, who do you like to watch play? You know, who, when they're on the television, do you really like to see? And he went, let me think. Well, me. Honestly, you've got a room full of professionals. He brought the house down, actually. So he's such a character. What you see is what you get. And this is when he was, when just a kid.
Only he could get away with that as well. There are only a few players.
But his manager had Alex Ferguson, his head in his hands, just going, "Oh my goodness!" But never knowingly undersold. That's our Cristiano.
No, I can imagine.
And well, he's put his boots, his goals, his crosses, where his mouth is.
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And he's right up there, isn't he? He's one of the best players of all time.
Oh, definitely, 100%.
I mean, Claire, going back to the start of your career, can you give us an insight into some of the challenges you had to overcome to get into the industry?
Gosh, well, of course, it's a long time ago. And luckily, a lot of those difficulties no longer stand in the way of women who want to work in football. In my day, there were no jobs for women in football, and I had to be quite creative and persistent to prove that I was as good and I knew my stuff. You know, football, you can't learn football, you can't learn sport, you can't go and revise for a football examination. It doesn't work like that. Well, you are talking on the radio or on television, in the written press or online. to people who know just as much about the sport as you do, and who love it as much as you do, and have watched as much as you have, and have read and have listened to as much as you have. So you can only be as good as them, but you will get found out if you don't know it. So you can't cheat sport, and if you don't have a passion for it, I think you'll get found out quite quickly.
Yeah.
So that I think is something that goes through from those days to this. People will find you out. But back then I felt that I had to be twice as good as my male counterparts, because if they made a slight slip, nobody would think twice about it. But everyone was waiting for me to get something wrong so they could say, oh, well, women, blah, 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 blah. I mean, when I went on the touchline, I was the first female reporter on the touchline to do post-match. Sky actually asked Sir Alex Ferguson if he would talk to me, if having a female on the touchline, he would actually front up and do an interview. So that's how revolutionary it was. They had to check that the most important manager in the country at the time would speak to me. And he rather grudgingly said he would. And then I went to interview him for the first time, which was a pre-match sit-down ahead of the Charity Shield. And he sort of grunted at me as he put his microphone on and said, "So, you're on the touchline now, are you?" Because I'd known him from my time with Arsenal, with Arsène Wenger, when Manchester United and Arsenal were fighting each other for the title. And I said, "Yes, Alec." And he went, "Yeah, so you expect me to speak to you, do you?" And I said, "I don't know why you're putting the microphone on if not." And then he sat down and said, "You won't last the season. What's your first question?"
Wow.
Which is why earlier I called him a bit of a tyrant. But
I can't quite believe he said that, to be honest.
Well, no, but it was a different time, and I can't tell you what a lovely guy Sir Alex Ferguson is off the pitch.
Yes.
Away from football, he is charm personified, and a lovely, lovely guy, very funny, a great raconteur, someone that, is great company and to be around. But when he is fighting for his team, it starts. He's not above intimidating reporters, referees, other managers, other players, other chairmen, anything that he can give his 1% to make it better for his team, and I don't have a problem with that.
To get to the point you were in 2007 of hosting those awards, what was the journey like to get to that? How did you start just to get to hosting those awards?
You mean in television or just generally?
Just in general.
Well, I mean, so I started out rather naively thinking that I wanted to do something in my career that I really enjoyed. So it was a bit sort of right. Well, what do I like doing? I like football. Okay, great, I'll do football. And then my dad, who's a careers advisor at the time, pointed out that I was a girl. Which was, very intelligent of him and a good spot, I thought, as I was only 21. Good spot, Dad. So he pointed out there weren't so many jobs around for girls, and of course there weren't. But what there was at that time, which was 1990, was that there was no particular media facility or media management or PR facility at any of the clubs. In fact, in those days, there were only about 2 jobs, one at the Football League, one at the Football Association, and then 2 clubs that had press offices, Leicester City and Tottenham Hotspur. And the rest of it was just the manager's secretary, just coordinated people who wanted to come along for games or to see the manager, because it was so much a smaller operation, of course, in those days. There was, the BBC wouldn't often send a camera unless they were doing a feature for Football Focus. Maybe the local camera team might go along if there was a home game, a big home game, but apart from that, it was mostly your written journalists, national and local. So there was never really a need for it. But I think after the World Cup in Italy in 1990, there was a huge explosion of interest in the game. England got to the semi-finals, Gaza cried, and all of a sudden, it wasn't just a tribal thing, football. It was more, everyone was interested. Women were interested. They were seating stadia after the Hillsborough disaster, and it was becoming a lot more. I mean, people would say prawn sandwiches and gentrified, but the point was it became more accessible for all sorts of different walks of life. It wasn't, you weren't taking your hands into your life into your hands or anything to go to a football match, which it had a little bit been during the 70s and 80s. So there was this huge difference in how football was viewed. So I just kind of like pitched in from there. I did some voluntary work at Tottenham. I wrote to every club in the league to see if anyone would give me a chance, saying, look, I think you need a media officer, and this is what my ideas are for helping the players or the manager, helping your commercial operation, your corporate side of things. And, and it was still a bit early for everybody. But in the end, I got a job at the Football Trust after doing my voluntary work at Tottenham, and I worked in celebrity PR, which I didn't really enjoy. I did a charity project called Football Against MS, which is a big walk around the clubs with the players and the club's involvement, which ended at Wembley Stadium and at the Scottish Cup final up at Hampden. And so I was already doing things within football, and then the Football Trust advertised for a press officer because they were implementing the grant aid for the all-seater stadia following the Hillsborough report. The Taylor report, into the Hillsborough disaster. So I applied for that job. I got it.
Yeah.
So now there were 3 press officer jobs plus the 2 clubs. And, and I didn't know what you're supposed to do as a press officer. I just sort of made it up as I went along. And, but that's what I always think. Like, if you get an opportunity, then just go and do it. And if if something goes wrong, never mind. You'll find that you're probably just as knowledgeable about what you think is good.
Yeah.
A good way to promote the Football Trust. We were giving out £2 million in grants to clubs, and we were doing a lot of community initiatives as well. And that was good news, so you need to promote that good news. It's not all about who won and who lost in football. There's a lot going on around it, even back in those days, which were untapped, that stories that just weren't told. So from the Football Trust, the trust board itself was made up with all the executives from the other football organisations. So you had the chief exec of the FA, Graham Kelly, the chief exec of the Football League, guys down from Scotland in their respective positions at the Scottish League and the Scottish FA, because it was obviously throughout Great Britain that these grants are being awarded. So I got to know all of them. Gordon Taylor of the PFA, he was on it as well. And obviously I'd written to all of them asking for jobs at various times, so they all kind of knew who I was. So what happened was I was there for 2 years, from 92 to 94. And then in 94, the FA decided they were going to revamp their press office operation as they were looking ahead to Euro 96. And I was automatically asked to come for an interview. So to do that. So I got that job as well. So then I'm at the FA. So 94 to 96, I was at the FA, mostly looking after, obviously, the FA's image, but also things like small-sided football that Terry Venables, the England manager at the time, was a big advocate of. That you really had to get the message across to. It was the fathers, really. You look around community football, and it's all the dads who are managing the teams and giving their boys, and hopefully now girls, the opportunity to play football. But they all wanted to be Sir Alex Ferguson, so they wanted 11 aside, and to try to persuade them to go down to 8 aside and give kids the chance to get on the football. Who wants to be stuck out at left back on a rainy Sunday morning when it's blowing a gale, watching everyone else play up and down the pitch, and you never get a touch? Then that kid isn't going to turn up again. So Terry got very involved, which was great, because you need it. It's no good me telling anyone, or some little whippersnapper 26-year-old telling me that I can't manage my kids' football team. No, thank you. But Terry turns up to tell them. So stories like that, and then of course working with the international squad. So I was in charge of all the youth teams, as well as involved with the senior squad. So, Michael Owen would have been in my under-16s. The likes of Rio Ferdinand, Frank Lampard would have been in my under-18s. I say mine, obviously. They weren't mine. I wasn't the coach. Under-21s, you look at players like Robbie Fowler, Jamie Redknapp, David Beckham. And then the seniors, of course, include, Gary Neville, Gareth Southgate, Tony Adams, David Seaman, Alan Shearer. So it was a brilliant time to be there. But unfortunately, I got a bit disheartened when my boss left, and I was his number 2. We had a main boss, and then number 1 and number 2 in the press office. And when my boss left, there was no question that I was going to be offered his job. I was too young and too female, and I was told in no uncertain terms, in those phrases, you can't possibly. But then what I did do is do my job and my boss's job for 3 months, while the FA recruited someone to come in above my head. And then when he did come in above my head, I then spent the next 3 months training him up, so that he understood how we worked in the press office. So that, I was a bit disheartened that, my gender was going to stop me from progressing.
Yeah.
So when Arsenal Vice Chairman David Dean approached my boss David Davis, so many Davids in this story, to ask if I would go and set the press office up at Arsenal for Arsène Wenger, who was about to come in, he said, David Davis said, "There's no way she'll work for Arsenal. She's a Spurs season ticket holder." And then told me about it, laughing. "You won't want to go and do that, will you?" I went, "Yes, I will, actually, because they are forward-sighted enough to know that I am a girl and I can still do the job.
Yeah.
And they want me to be the top. So, yes, I am going to go and talk to them. And, yeah, I might be a Tottenham fan, but I'm a professional.
Yeah.
And so I'm not sitting here being number two to somebody who I've just babysat. I'm going to go and set up my own structures and my own press office with this new foreign manager who knows nothing about the English media and therefore doesn't have little cosy friendships with certain journalists, who's going to look to me to set structures up for him." And, and I went like a shot.
Yeah.
So, and working with Arsène Wenger was amazing. So, sorry, this is a really long
No,
answer,
it's
isn't
not.
it?
It's all right.
So 2 years then, I've got this thing about 2 years, haven't I? 2 years at Arsenal from 96 to 98 when they won the double, beating Newcastle in the FA Cup final. And then, because I'd worked a lot, of course, with Sky Sports, with the FA on internationals and, of course, with Arsenal, in 98, Sky Sports were setting up Sky Sports News. There's this new idea of a rolling news channel that was only going to be broadcast on digital. It wasn't going on old television, as it were. So, when we first started it, very few people actually had it. You had to, get it through the digital thing. You had to have satellite and stuff. And I thought, I was getting a bit fed up with Arsenal by this point, because players always think they're doing too much. And the press always and the media always think they're getting too little, and you get squashed in between, trying to tread this middle path. So I thought, well, I know nothing about presenting, but I'll go and have a go at that. So and I did. I went along and did a screen test, got the job, and here I am 26 and a half years later, blowing the myth out of the water that I only stayed at one place for 2 years.
Well, at your years at Arsenal, what was it like working with Arsène Wenger?
Oh, he was hilarious, Arsène. He's such a nice man. He's such a bright man. I would go along on a Friday for the pre-match press conference, and I'd brief him on the sort of things I thought he might get asked. And he would listen so politely and just go, "Yes, Claire, yes." and I knew he just thought it was such a waste of his time, because he didn't care what they asked him. He was bright enough to be able to handle anything. He knew it was a part of his job he had to do. We'd streamlined the way we did it, so he did one written media section, one radio section, one television section, and then if there was a live game, he'd have to do a one-on-one with the broadcasters. If it was a Sunday game, he'd have to have a separate with the Sundays. And occasionally we'd do extra one-on-ones, but mostly he didn't want to do them. I used to, back in the old days, I used to go into his office, which was next door to mine at Highbury, with this sheaf of papers to ask him if he wanted to do stuff. And he used to go, "No, no."
I can always just imagine the look of disgust on
exactly.
his
No,
face.
it wasn't disgust. It was just, it was puzzlement. Why? Why? And then I remember, sort of about 2 months in, and I went and I had one piece of paper in my hand, and he smiled and he said, "Now you begin to understand, Claire." So he didn't want to do it. All he wanted to do was he wanted to work with his team. And anything else that where you could take away the noise that surrounded it. That's what he wanted. So, but no, and the way he played football was, amazing. Those that 98 year. I mean, obviously I left before the Invincibles, but I mean, Dennis Bergkamp is still to this day is one of the best footballers I've seen play. He was like a ballerina on the pitch. I'm not sure he'll thank me for that particular analogy, but it was a terrific side, and Christian Gross was at. Christian Gross was at Tottenham. Oh, sorry, we're being interrupted by Niall walking in. Get out. No, come
You're all right,
It's all
Niall.
right. You know, you just some journalists have never
so keen.
never
He's
learn
so
to be
keen.
professional, do they? They just walk straight into a recording. So no, it was great, and obviously they were winning games. But I remember there was one point in my second season, which is the season they won the double, and by November. They'd lost 2 games in a row, I think, and they had this enormous sit down in the dressing room that actually Arsène Wenger allowed to happen without him, where the senior pros sat down, you know, your Tony Adams, your Steve Bowles, your David Seamans, your David Platts, with the younger players that had come in, your Patrick Vieira's, Emmanuel Petit, and they said, we need some more, you know, we need the midfield to start helping out at the back. And they worked all this out for themselves, and I think they were unbeaten from that day onwards. Once Patrick and Manu in midfield realised what they could do to screen, and the forward players realised that defence started from the front. Stuff that, you know, obviously under George Graham had been meat and drink to the older pros. But they needed to get that across, and I think for the rest of the season they were unbeaten. Obviously they won the FA Cup as well.
For sure.
So it was. But he didn't go in and tell all these senior pros who had won everything under George Graham in a very authoritarian way that that they needed to change everything they were doing. He went in and listened to them and let them contribute. I mean, he brought in broccoli. They didn't like that. He brought in half-hour stretching sessions after training, which were compulsory, and they moaned and moaned about. But then Steve Bold turned around when his career lasted 3 years longer than he expected, and credited Arsène Wenger with all that nutrition and stretching protocols that have elongated his career and extended his playing time. So, you know, they were both open-minded. Both sides were open-minded. So, it was a fun time.
Well, I know that you mentioned Ian Wright when we were talking earlier. Is it true that there's some sort of friendly rivalry when Arsenal and Tottenham play? Is that
friendly rivalry? What are you talking about?
I mean,
to be honest, I think at that time between the players, I remember it being quite friendly. When I was doing voluntary work at Tottenham back in just after I graduated, that was the year that they played the first semi-final at Wembley. And I remember after the semi-finals, I think both teams must have been at home in the semis on different days, obviously. Quarterfinals, sorry. He was at home at the quarterfinals. And I remember I was in a cab with some of the Tottenham players, and the Arsenal players were in a cab going the other way, and everyone was waving and shouting at each other. And so I think it was quite, actually, between the players off the pitch, quite friendly. Of course, there's nothing friendly about the rivalry between the supporters. No. But I mean, on Derby Day, I used to get a lot of stick, not only from season ticket holders at Tottenham, but Wrighty was the chief tormentor in chief, shall we say. And he'd bounce around going, "You're not supporting us today, are you? I'm going to tell Mr. Wenger. I'm going to tell the gaffer that you're not supporting us today." And but I mean, you couldn't get a bigger character than Ian Wright. And what a career he's made for himself after football as well.
Brilliant.
And what a role model he's been. He's a big champion of the women's game, obviously a big champion for people of colour and ethnic minorities, and I think his contribution to football is not just on the pitch but in all sorts of ways, and he's brilliant company.
Oh, I can imagine.
His energy is amazing.
He's one reason why we're doing this podcast.
We'd all love to meet him, to be fair.
Anything you can do then. But we just want to ask you one last question because we're conscious of your time. Well, we just want to ask you about Roy Hodgson.
Okay.
Could you tell us a little story? Does he still send you books?
I've not had one for a while now, but I remember the first one. He was at Blackburn Rovers when I was still at Arsenal, and he came in for, obviously, as the manager, just to see Arsène, who was in the office next to me, and he popped his head round the door and said hello and blah blah blah, and I had a novel on my desk, and so he said, "Oh, I've read this," and we started talking about books, and I'm trying to the life of me, it's just gone straight at Birdsong, that was what it was. He said, "Oh, I'm reading Birdsong at the moment by Sebastian Faulks. I don't know if you know the book." And I said, "Oh, is it?" And he said, "Oh my God, it's the best book I've read for ages." And then 2 days later, it arrived on my desk at Arsenal, my name on it. So, you know, he's a great thinker of the game as well, Roy. A great servant to the game. And of course, where was one of the early managers to work abroad, English managers to go abroad and bring that experience back from particularly the Scandinavian countries.
Yeah.
And you know, and Arsène always got on very well with him because he liked to talk football just as he does with Alex Ferguson.
Yes.
To say that they don't get on is a complete myth, you know, because
Yeah.
they go to these UEFA coaching courses and you know, and they all talk football all day long because that's what drives them all.
Yeah.
So no, Roy Hodgson is the top man.
No, I can imagine. Well, Claire, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We really appreciate it, and we hope you've had a good day. We hope we've ended it nicely for you.
Yeah, no, it's been great fun.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you.
here's to another 25 years.
Oh my goodness me! Don't wish that on me.
Thank you, Claire. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys.